class today. This is going to be an incredibly interesting class because everything is going to be new yet familiar at the same time, because we're going to be learning how to work with water mixable oil paints. So if you don't know me yet, my name is Nolan Clark from the Paint Basket, and I normally paint in regular oil paints. So when Daler-Rowney asked me if I would like to try the water mixable oil paints, I immediately said yes, because I not only enjoy trying new things as an artist, but I've heard a lot about the benefits of using water mixable oil paints. So this sounded like a great opportunity to put these benefits to the test. So I invite you to join me for the free mini course, where we're going to put Daler-Rowney water mixable oil paints through its paces, and in the process we'll learn how to correctly work with them. The course consists of 4 lessons. In this lesson we'll play around with the water mixable oil paints to familiarize ourselves with the difference between water mixable oil paint and regular oil paint, and thereby we'll at least know how to use them correctly. In the next 3 lessons, we'll paint a few artworks using water mixable oil paints, but we'll paint them in traditional oil painting styles. So for example, we're going to paint a wet in wet artwork, we're going to paint an artwork in an impasto style, and then we're also going to paint another one using the layering or the glazing method. So I think it's going to be awesome fun. Let's start off by taking a look at what does Daler-Rowney say about the paint itself. Georgian water mixable oils are high quality paints. They give users an alternative to traditional oils. The range of 40 vibrant colors can be thinned, mixed and washed, giving your painting a wash effect similar to watercolor. All Georgian water mixable oils offer high levels of lightfastness, pigment load and durability. The oils can be cleaned easily with just soap and water, but it's important to remember that synthetic or sable brushes are best for this product. So try the Daler-Rowney Robert Simmons brand for great brush options. These paints dry at a rate similar to traditional oil paints, and your finished project will last for years to come. Georgian water mixable oils can be used on typical oil painting surfaces such as canvas, gessoed paper and wood. The Daler-Rowney Georgian water mixable oils come in all the colors of the rainbow. They've got a full range of paints. The ones I've got here are just the ones that I usually use, my favorite colors. But obviously you've got your own set of favorite colors, and I promise you all those different colors are available. I have looked. Right, so the colors that I tend to use is titanium white. I always get the big tubes of that because you can never have enough white. Then I have Viridian, cerulean blue, sap green, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium orange, cadmium red, burnt sienna, raw umber, alizarin crimson and French ultramarine. So I find with all these guys over here, I can paint anything I never need to. On these labels you will notice that they've got some markings over here at the bottom. So that 375 and the 221 and the 663, that just tells you what type of pigment or which hue or color is being used inside the tube of paint. So if you ever need to match a color, you can use that number there to make sure that you're getting exactly the correct color. Because obviously you don't just get sap green, you get viridian green, you get light green, you get all sorts of different greens. So that 375 allows you to make sure that you're getting exactly the correct color. Okay, the marking next to it, which is that little block over there. So you'll notice on this one it's a white block. That's a block with a little diagonal line through it, and that's a black block. So the difference between those 3 there is that block tells you how transparent or how opaque your color is. So a white block tells you that this is a transparent color. The block that's half white and half black tells you it's a semi-transparent or a semi-opaque color. Same thing, eh? Then you get the one that's got the black block, and that tells you that's a opaque color. So I can paint that over colors and it will shine through. That will shine through a little bit, and that shouldn't shine through because it's opaque. Then next to it you got these little stars. So those stars tell you how light fast the colors are. Now your light fastness is not dependent on the quality of the paint. It doesn't make it a better or worse quality paint. It's just simply a case of each pigment or each coloring that's used inside the paint naturally has its own rate at which the sun would fade it out. So for example, you'd find that the reds tend to have a lower light fastness simply because reds tend to fade quicker. Where you'd get more earthy type of colors, you'll find they tend to have a higher permanence, so they won't fade as easily or as quickly in the sun. So your browns and stuff do often tend to be, more often than not, tend to be the 4 stars. So all the paints that I've got here are a 3 or a 5 star, which means they will last for hundreds of years if you paint them using these paints. So the quality of the paint, as far as the ratings and stuff is concerned, are identical to the regular oil paints. So I think the first thing we need to do is let's take the water mixable oil paints and let's compare them against regular oil paints. So we'll take a regular tube of oil paint and a tube of water mixable oil paints, and we'll put them to the test to see what's the difference. So this is the regular oil paint. So the first thing that I can see is that the tubes are different, but they're not excessively different. So when you are buying oil paints from now on, I do want you to just check if it says underneath it water mixable oil or if it says oil color, so that you don't by accident purchase regular oil paints when you're meaning to buy the water mixable oil paint. So let's take the regular oil paint and let's pop some down. So as you can see, this is also the Daler-Rowney Georgian brand, and this is yellow ochre. And this is the Georgian water mixable yellow ochre oil paint. So at first glance they seem identical. The colors certainly seem identical. Let's put that guy there to remind us and that guy there to remind us which one is which. So that's the regular oil paint and this is the water mixable oil paint. So let's spread these guys out, see what their consistency like. So this is it's a lovely buttery consistency. Let's check this one. Absolutely the same. Look at that. It spreads just beautifully. So there's no difference as far as that's concerned. I can't see a difference, maybe that's ever so slightly darker, but literally a half a shade. You know, if you're under normal painting, I don't think that's going to make any kind of a difference. Alright, so with this guy here, for us, with your regular oil paint, for us to paint with it, or if we want it thinner, we're going to have to use a painting medium or some linseed oil. So let's grab some linseed oil and thin it down and see how that thins down. Let's put 1, 2, 3 drops, so we've got an equal control. Okay, so it's turning into a nice smooth consistency. I can see I'm going to get nice coverage. Maybe if I spread that down there like that, we can start to see how it moves. So So here's now the interesting thing. With the water mixable oil paints, you can do exactly the same thing, except now we've got two options. We can either mix water into it, or you get a specially formulated, the Georgian water mixable oil, linseed oil. So this is water mixable linseed oil. So let's try the water mixable linseed oil first. So I'll pop it in. Mix some of that up. 1, 2, 3 drops. And let's work that in there. And I'm getting exactly the same consistency. Look at that. Absolutely the same. No difference in the feel. Okay, so now let's add water to it. So let's move all that up. Put that guy over there. And let's put some of that paint down there. So I'll tell you in a second when do you use oil and when do you use water. Let's first just start off with about the same amount of paint over there that we're going to mix the water into as what we had over there. So we've got 1, 2, 3 drops. Okay, so the first thing I'm noticing is that the color is lightening up ever so slightly. Now, how does it work that you can mix, let's spread that out over there, still looking absolutely identical, and I'm getting the same consistency, if not ever so slightly thinner, which makes perfect sense because the oil is thicker in consistency than the water. So in other words, you'd need less drops inside your mix if you're using water. So how is it that you can mix water into oil paint? So that works like this. They've taken the molecules of the oil paint and they've chemically modified them so that they will bond with the water. So I'm not a scientist. I don't know all those chemical ratios and proportions and all those fancy things that they do. That I leave to the clever guys at Daler-Rowney. They do their magic on their side. But it's important to realize that when in this tube over here, there's no water in here. That's standard oil paint with standard linseed oil, but it's been chemically modified so that it can bond with water molecules. So that's standard oil. So by the time you've got here and your water evaporates, then you're left with normal oil paint as we know it. In other words, your longevity of this water mixable oil paint is identical to longevity of your standard oil paints. So I think the next test we need to do is, I also paint in acrylic. So my first question is, if that's got water in it, will this paint dry quicker than those two guys that have got oil in them? So I'm going to put the hairdryer on that and let's see what happens to the paint. Okay, so I've blow dried this now for a good few minutes, and as you can see, there's no difference. In other words, what is happening here is, although it's water mixable, that water evaporates, but the drying time of your paint remains identical, whether you've added water to it or you've added the water mixable linseed oil to it. Because oil paint works like this. You've got the pigment, which is like, for example, a finely ground stone that's, say, this color over here. Then they've added linseed oil into it as a medium which you can work with. So that's the oil inside the oil paint. The way oil paint dries is not like acrylics, where once the water evaporates, then the paint sets and it's hard. Here, your oil needs to dry, and oil air dries. It's a sort of a reaction between the oil inside the paint and the air. So as the air gets into contact with the linseed oil, it gradually changes the chemical composition of the oil, and that's what sets that linseed oil. And then you've obviously got now the pigment, which gives that linseed oil its color, the oil paint its color. You've got those pigment is suspended inside the oil. So you'll find with oil, it dries more and more and more with time. So although you can say leave this guy here and say 2, 3, 4 days or a week or whatever later, this feels touch dry. It's actually not 100% dry. If you painted really thick paint like we have over there, it can take hundreds of years to dry. So the bottom line is, you've got absolutely no difference in the drying time. So that is the same. So now I also want you to notice, remember when we initially mixed in our water into the oil paint on this guy over here, we had that initial change of color. Can you notice now, however, that those colors are absolutely identical? In other words, when you add your water in here, it's just for that initial first few seconds while your water molecules are connecting to the molecules inside the oil paint, that you have that slight change in color, but within a few seconds it disappears and you have identically the same color. So we now know that our colors are the same, our consistency is the same, and I can see over here as well that the paint that I've put down, as I've put it down, has remained in exactly the same way. In other words, if I had to start painting impasto with the water mixable oil paints, it's going to retain its shape absolutely identical. So to really give us a full-on test with that, what I'm going to do is, let's take just a scrap piece of canvas and then we put some impasto paint down. Then we'll know for sure whether the water mixable oil paints changes its shape when it's dry when compared to the regular oil paint. Okay, so here I've just got a scrap piece of canvas. So I'm going to put down the different paints on there. And I think we'll try and get exactly the same or a similar shape with the two different paints, so that we've got as controlled as possible. So let's put, say, that down. I'll put so much paint on it. I'll put it down, and then we spread it out like that, so it forms just a little bump. Seems like we had about roughly the same amount of paint. So I'll put him down there. We take that down. Okay, so let's write down which one is which, so that we don't forget. So you'll notice I've got 3 separate droppers over here. This is the standard linseed oil that you would use with regular oil paint. So let's write down over there. Regular. Now let's add some water to that guy over there to thin him down. Okay, so I'm not sure if you could see it, but initially you've got a change of color as you add the water, but then it soon goes back to its normal color. So that's one thing that you do need to just bear in mind when you're doing your initial mixing, color mixing, you mix your color first and match your color, and then you add the amount of water into it that you need to thin it down. Obviously, if you're using the water mixable linseed oil, that's not a problem at all, because then it doesn't happen. Okay, so let's call this one. I like the wording that Daler-Rowney uses for it. They call it whammo. So it's a capital W, small a, M, O. WA for water, M for mixable, O for oil. Whammo! Fantastic. Can you see there? This is already, it's returned back to its regular color. So if you are concerned about the color, just leave it for a few minutes, it will return. So that color change is just because of that little reaction that's taking place. So don't worry about it, it's normal. Okay, so I'm going to put that one side, and it is quite thick. I'll lift that up, I'll show you. So there you can see I've got at least 2 to 3 millimeters worth of height on each one of them. So we leave that for a week or two to dry, and then we can compare the difference. Okay, so I've left this paint now for roughly a week and a half. So let's check the regular oil paint. If I touch over here where it's thin, I can feel it's touch dry, slightly tacky still, and the water mixable oil paint is actually a little bit more tacky. Let's feel over here by the thick. So I'm pressing very gently. Yeah, I can feel it's got a good skin on it. But if I press over here, it's got a little bit of give. Let's see, maybe if I press it with a knife. Can you see that? But it springs back. It's got enough of a skin so that I could paint over it very gently. Let's check the water mixable oil paint. Okay, so the water mixable oil paint is still a bit wet. In other words, the water mixable oil paint dries slower than the regular oil paint. And as you can see, there's absolutely no difference to the height. So for interest's sake, let's see what happens if we take a regular oil paint and we add water to it and see what happens. So we'll put that down over there. Let's go our standard 1, 2, 3 drops, like we had with the other guys. So let me see if I can zoom way in there. So that you can see what's happening. Because oil and water don't mix, this water is actually just moving around. Let's see if I can spread it out. Hey, come back. Hey, come back. My water is just running all over the show. It's lying over there. Oil and water simply don't mix. So you couldn't do the same thing with regular oil paint. Okay, so now you've noticed that I've added water mixable linseed oil into that water mixable oil paint, and here I've added water into the water mixable oil paint. So why do we have two different options, and when do you use each? So that works like this. With oil paint, we've got the fat over lean principle that we need to adhere to, otherwise our paint is going to crack. So let me explain how the fat over lean principle works. When you paint one layer of oil paint, you've got to put the next layer that you put on top of it has to have more oil in it. Let me draw it for you and you'll be able to see it a lot easier. Let's say, for example, you've painted, this is now your canvas. Let's draw your canvas over here. So you're seeing your canvas from the side, not from the front. Now you've painted some stuff. Maybe you've painted a landscape over there, and that's this blue layer of oil paint that's now lying on your canvas over here. So now you leave that to dry. I think just for what the heck, so that it's easier to see. Let's draw that a little bit thicker, like that. Now you leave this paint to dry, and then you come back, say for example with a glaze or another layer of paint. Then this layer here and the top layer on top of it that you've now just painted, let's draw that in maybe with some red. So let's say there's some new layer of paint that you've painted. These two paints are going to dry at different rates, because remember we said earlier, oil paint doesn't just dry once and then it's dry like acrylic does, because of the process of the way oil paint dries. This layer here is going to constantly, gradually become drier and drier, and when it becomes drier and drier, it becomes harder and harder. So now this layer of paint over here is also now going to start drying, and it's going to become drier and drier, which means it will become harder and harder. So now this is what's going to happen. Because these guys are drying at different rates, if this layer at the bottom dries slower than the guy at the top, then what's going to happen is, as you've got temperature changes during the day, it's cooler at night or in the morning, and then it's warmer in the middle of the day, your paint, same as anything else, expands and contracts. So this bottom layer over here, if that expands and contracts because it's wetter or less dry than the top layer, then this top layer, being drier, can't move. So what's going to happen? It cracks. So in order to stop this effect from happening, you want this guy to dry quicker than that guy, so that he's still more elastic or more flexible than the lower layer. So to stop that cracking happening, and to ensure that this guy dries slower than the guy below it, in this layer here, the top layer, we add more oil, because we know it's the oil is the thing that needs to dry, and that's the thing that dries slower. So the more oil there is in the mix that needs to dry, the slower it's going to dry. So that's what the whole fat over lean principle is all about. So let's do this. Let's say for example that layer over there, in each mix you just add 1 drop of oil to get it at the correct consistency. Then this layer over here you would have to add at least, say, 2 drops, so that it's got more oil in it. And now you leave all that stuff for a week or two to dry. So obviously it's touch dry, but it's not truly dry. It's going to take still hundreds of years to fully dry. Now you come and you want to paint another layer over this, maybe in a second or a third or a fourth glazing layer. So your next layer over here would need to have a little bit more oil in it. So maybe, for example, 3 drops. So look what's going to happen. That one's got less oil, he's going to dry quicker. He's got more oil, he's going to dry a little bit slower. He's got even more oil, he'll dry even slower. So that way this guy can flex while that guy is drying. This guy can flex while he's drying, and so on. And that's how you stop the cracking effect on your paint. Okay, so let's go back over here and finish our discussion about when do we use water and when do we use oil to thin down our water mixable oil paints. If you're painting alla prima in one setting, or let me put it even better, whatever you're painting today, You simply use water to thin down your paints and get the correct consistencies of the paint and get the correct techniques that you want to paint whatever you need to today. Once the water evaporates, this whole layer of paint that you've painted today has all got exactly the same amount of oil in it. In other words, it's all going to dry at exactly the same rate or exactly the same time. The thing comes in to get your fat over lean correct is when you're painting over subsequent sessions. For example, if you've stopped painting and now a week later or so, a few days later, now you need to come back and continue painting or add glazes or whatever, then you need to adhere to the fat over lean principle. So what you then do is, as before, whatever you're painting today, you can use water to thin down your paints. But today, you need to add some oil into your water mix so that there's whatever you're painting today is oilier or fatter than what you painted in the previous session. So still today, you're going to, because you've got oil in the mix, you can still use water to get thinner subsequent layers of whatever you're painting today. When today's water evaporates, you're left with one mass of paint that's got more oil in it than the previous session's paint. So now you've got a fat layer over a lean layer. So this guy will remain more flexible than this guy. So this guy will dry quicker, he will dry slower, and no cracking. Let's say you stop again, and now you come back another week later and you continue painting. Today, you need to add even more oil into your water than you did the previous time to get this layer fatter than the previous layer. Make sense? Alright. Just one thing, you can't just use any oil into your water, obviously, because oil and water don't mix. You need to use the Daler-Rowney water mixable linseed oil in the bottle that I showed you earlier. You added that to your water. Alright, so now let's go and take a look and see if there's a difference in mixing the colors, in the actual color mixing process, than with regular oil paints. Let's put down our three primary colors. So I'm going to be using lemon yellow, cadmium red, and French ultramarine. Now let's mix adjacent colors into each other to get our secondaries. Now we can see how these colors mix into each other. So I'll take some yellow and then just a touch of red. So I'll first take, when I'm mixing colors, I always take the lightest color and I'll mix a little bit of the darker color into it, because you'll find that usually the darker colors are stronger than the lighter colors as far as their tinting power is concerned. And you can already see there, look at the big difference that just that tiny amount of red has made to that yellow. So we've got a really lovely orange that. That's really great. Let's take our yellow and we add just a tiny touch of blue into it. Can you see how little I'm adding? Rather too little than too much. So that's given us a lovely grassy green. Let's maybe make it just a tad darker. Yeah, like that. That should be good enough. Beautiful intense green there. So I'm happy with that mix. Now let's mix a purple. So that would be blue and red. So purple is a little bit more difficult to mix because you've got to get the ratio right to get the right color. So I will usually start around 50-50. And then I'll check my color by dragging that out. So now I can see in this little twilight zone, can you see over there it's really dark, and over there you can see the tile that I'm mixing my paint on, my palette. In between there is the color that you've actually got. So you're sort of looking at twilight zone to see what the correct color is that you add. So it mustn't have a red look and it mustn't have a blue look. Then you know you've got purple. So I'm pretty happy with that. So that's a nice purple. And so this has shown us that the standard color mixing is going to work equally well with the water mixable oil paints. So here's now an interesting question, seeing as we're mixing colors and stuff. Could I take some of the water mixable paints and mix it into regular oil paints? What would happen? Alright, so let's take some water mixable oil paint. We'll put it down over there. Now we'll take some regular oil paint. Okay, so let's mix these guys into each other and see, first of all, do they mix or don't they mix? Right, so as you can see, they are mixing into each other 100% correct, or as normal, and there's nothing happening to the consistency or anything like that, unlike if you had to try and mix an oil paint and acrylic paint into each other. So they mix into each other 100% correct. So the problem now is that your regular oil paint hasn't got that chemical change applied to it that the water mixable has, which allows the water molecules to adhere or bind with the water mixable oil paints. That now doesn't have it. So the minute you mix these two guys together, so now you're sitting with oil paint that cannot be mixed with water, because that guy there is not mixable with water. We saw it a minute ago that the water just lay on top. So in other words, if you do ever combine these two, it becomes a regular oil paint. Then you have to treat it as a regular oil paint and use regular linseed oil, and you'd have to use turpentine to wash your brushes. Now comes the fun part with water mixable oil paints. Let's say, for example, you've taken this and you've painted it, and now your brush is dirty and now it needs to be cleaned. So what are you going to do? You're not going to use turps like before to wash your brush. You're not going to use turpentine. You're going to use plain water out of the tap. So you take your brush and look at that. You see how that paint is just dissolving in there. Let me get my cloth, just dry it off, and there we have it. So by the same token, the same thing is going to happen over here if you want to clean your palette. So let me show you a neat little trick. I've got lots of paint over here which is 100% normal, straight out the tube. So I don't want to waste that paint. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So I'll scoop it up with my knife, and I'll just pop it onto the top of the tube of paint like that. Can you see that? It's just I've just piled it up there. And hold the tube up straight, and then you just let it drop under its own weight like this. Pile any up that's moved. So don't slam it down. You see, I'm just lifting it up and leaving it, lifting it up, leaving it. And all that paint has now gone back in there. See that? So that's how I saved myself a ton of money over all the years that I've been painting. So you can do that with all your paints, as long as there's no other color mixed into it. So for example, there I've got a little bit of green there. I can't do it with that green. That one. Tap him down. Look there, it's all back inside. There's actually place for more. Okay, so now we want to clean our palette. So just scoop up the excess. Then I wipe it off on a roll of kitchen towel, like that. because that's now old paint that you can't use anymore. So we'll take that, you throw it in the bin. So while I have got paint here, I think I'm going to dirty my hands as well. What the heck? So we can clean our hands afterwards. So now to clean this, just take another clean piece of kitchen roll, like that. Scrunch it up, making sure I don't clean that hand in the process. Dip it in your water until it's dripping. Can you see that? The water is still gradually dripping off there. In other words, use enough water, don't be stingy with your water. And then just gently rub it, there's no pressure. Just pretty much you can say I'm dissolving this paint that's lying there. Look how quickly it dissolves. Isn't that incredible? Water mixing oil, who would have thought? And now there's not a smell or a sniff or a whiff of terps in the studio, and that for me is fantastic because it gives me hay fever. For some reason the terps gives me hay fever, and of course you get a headache from it. So look at that, spotlessly clean palette. Now let's clean our hands. So if you've got paint on your hands, so I'm just dipping my hand in the water there. I'm just rubbing it over my fingers. Can you see that? So now obviously you wouldn't normally do this. You would go to the tap and use soapy water. But you can see how quickly it's cleaning straight off my hands, just with regular old water. No soap or nothing. There we go, my hands are clean. They're not spotless because I do need to use soap. But the same thing would happen. Let's say, for example, you've got a bit of paint on your clothes. As long as you zap it before it's dry. So let's just scoop off the excess so that you don't have extra paint. So what I would do in a case like this, I would use just a bit of kitchen roll, just to sort of soak up any excess that I've got over there. So that go away. And I should be able to just throw this guy in the wash. Look at that mark just disappearing there. So I'm in the wash, just using regular washing powder, and when it comes out, it'll be gone. So no more paint on your clothes anymore. So I hope you're just as excited about the water mixable oil paints as I am. We've got all the advantages of regular oil paint, plus we've got the added advantage of no terps equals no smells, no more headaches, no more hay fever. Then we've got the added advantages: we wash our brushes, we thin down our paints, and we clean up using water. Fantastic. Okay, so in the next class we're going to be painting in different styles. So for this next class we're going to be painting alla prima, everything in one go. So I'll show you how to do that. See you then.